there are lots of things I could ask you to talk about. I guess the first thing is, why don't you tell me why you want to direct Yeomen of the Guard?
Gosh, why the Yeomen of the Guard specifically?
Yes.
I think of all the Gilbert and Sullivan operas, it's the most interesting. Sullivan wanted to write an opera with genuine human emotional content. And I think he felt that that was something that Gilbert had in him, but hadn't yet achieved in any of their previous work. So Gilbert worked very hard to produce a piece that he felt was more worthy of Sullivan's desire to write a grand opera. I find that very interesting because as artists, both of them were constantly evolving, trying to change direction in essentially creating a new genre in a sort of English comic opera tradition. And this piece, in some ways, represents the best of them. Sullivan had written some very interesting music for Ruddigore, which ended up on the cutting room floor because Gilbert felt it wasn't suited to the piece. And very little of the Yeomen of the Guard ended up on the cutting room floor. It's a piece that I think both of them were very happy with, and that, as a director, is very interesting to create a work that the authors themselves considered very finished. It's also a big departure from, as I said, from their earlier work. And it's very interesting that immediately after it, they returned to something much more in keeping with their earlier work. Not that it failed in any way, but that perhaps it was an experiment that they didn't develop and continue. Sullivan got to write his grand opera. He wrote Ivanhoe a few years later, 2 years later, 3 years later. And I think he sort of had scratched that itch to write a grand opera. And Gilbert felt more confident to return to their old style of work. But I'm not really answering the question, am I?
You are. You finished answering it. You're answering more than. So in terms of staging, you've been in it before.
Yes.
So you're obviously familiar with having been in it as well as coming to it as a director. What do you think? What do you think is kind of most engaging for audiences about Yeomen of the Guard? What are you hoping to make most engaging about it?
Well, it's an ideal piece for an audience who want to go to the opera, because, as I said before, it's much more operatic than their previous work. But it's also very typical of their previous work in that it's centred around comedy and comic characters. The only difference of this one is that there's no sort of impossible swapped at birth story or any topsy-turvydom, really. I've seen no reason to change its original setting. Gilbert writes in a sort of mock Tudor Shakespearean style text, which is very successful. And I think trying to change the setting actually is a bit counterproductive to the piece. You end up having to make an awful lot of changes to Gilbert's work, which I think is not necessary if you can tell the story without having to do anything with it in the terms of setting. And of course, you can't move it to another venue. It's the Yeomen of the Guard are all the warders of the Tower of London, so it has to be set there. I think it's very colourful. Costumes are very colourful, despite the medieval, Tudor setting. I think the story is very interesting, and I think the music is extremely powerful. I think Verdi would have been quite pleased to have written some of the music in this piece.
So it's a kind of good combination of good music, but also enjoyable music, and also a kind of good combination of comic and emotionally engaging.
For those who like Gilbert's comic, witty songs, there's several. And for those who want to see a really serious opera, there's something for them too.